the first significant treaty dealing with nuclear weapons is the NPT, as it's always called, the Nuclear Weapons Non-Proliferation Treaty. And it was adopted many years ago now, 1968, I think it was, and it put in place a prohibition of a partial sort on nuclear weapons. All those states that had tested a weapon before the negotiation of that treaty were allowed to continue with their possession of nuclear weapons, and it was any other country joining the treaty that had to prohibit them. So you could say it was a partial ban. In return for those countries agreeing to give up the possibility of developing nuclear weapons, in return for that promise from non-possessor states, the 5 nuclear weapons states recognized at that time as having nuclear weapons agreed to work towards disarmament. That's called the Grand Bargain. Now, that Grand Bargain would have been grand if only it had worked, but it hasn't really worked, and the 5 nuclear weapon possessors have not really kept their side of the deal. They're all modernizing their weapons, in many cases increasing their holdings. Most people say there's now a nuclear race underway. So the NPT has not been effective in delivering nuclear disarmament. Another aspect of weakness of the NPT is the fact that some key nuclear weapon possessors never have signed on. Israel is one, Pakistan and India are another 2. North Korea joined the NPT and then withdrew. So it doesn't deal to the issue of whether or not nuclear weapons should be banned across the board, and it doesn't make it clear that any use of nuclear weapons would be contrary to international humanitarian law. So all those various aspects were the impetus behind the adoption of a new treaty at the UN in 2017. Cyprus, by the way, took part in those negotiations at the UN and voted yes on the adoption of the treaty. It has not yet signed or ratified it, however. This treaty, the more recent 2017 one, as you say, called the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, puts in place a prohibition across the board against nuclear weapons. In doing that, it fills a legal gap. It doesn't say there are anyone allowed to hold nuclear weapons. As Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, said, there are no right hands for wrong weapons. And the TPNW makes it clear that nuclear weapons shouldn't be held or used by anyone, including because their usage is just not possible in compliance with international humanitarian law. So there is enormous normative value to the TPNW in its delegitimization of nuclear weapons. It closes the legal gap, as we always say. Before the TPNW, there was a global ban on 2 sorts of weapons of mass destruction. There were bans on chemical weapons and biological weapons. The TPNW closes that gap by prohibiting across the board nuclear weapons, the most destructive weapon of mass destruction of the lot. So it has a very important role, both in terms of international law and international humanitarian law.